This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I'm with Elle Grover-Fricks to take a spin with Jesus' concept of rewards or wages.
Oh, man, Brent. This one took so much work. Probably the most research I've done for the whole series.
Also, the most effort we've spent writing the intro.
Yeah, we've had 2 fights already, but they were good. They were fine. Lots of laughter. Here's the outline of what we're doing today. Number 1, we're going to read the verses in Matthew we're talking about today. Number 2, we're going to look at our own quote unquote problems with this passage. Then we're going to, number 3, dig through more Bible. Number 4, explore the Jewish literature. And then number 5, get some insight from Greco-Roman culture. So,
sounds beautiful.
Let's get into it.
So fight number 1. You wanted me to read this in the King James, and I'm not exaggerating. It took me 4 attempts reading the first part of the first sentence to even understand what this was trying to say.
The King James is so good, though. It's so special. It clings to the truth.
It's so corrupted by the Textus Receptus.
Wow. Okay, well, I'll leave it in your hands.
So I don't know. We could compromise and go New King James, or you could just let me read the NIV. I don't know. What do you think?
You are the one doing the reading. I will submit to your role.
Okay. Well, NIV it is then.
Oh boy.
I mean, we can quibble. We're gonna break this whole passage apart. So we'll see what happens. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you.
I'm going to try so hard not to get waylaid by the NIV there. I have more quibbles that are not important. So what's important is what comes up 3 times, no fewer than 3 times in this passage. Reward, 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 or if you're in a different translation, wage. And few of us like the idea of wages or reward for any kind of righteousness as rendered in the NIV there. We should all just be doing the things that we're supposed to be doing. And that's the reward, right? Maybe there's some sanctification along the way. And you are serving God, and that should be enough. We have limited interest in talking about eternal reward, because in most of Protestant theology, Wesleyan tradition aside, heaven is like a blanket, equal celebration of God's presence. There's no distinction between people who have done more works than others. Kind of feels like Mormon theology. And to me, it's not really a party if there's like a VIP room that's full of people who really pleased God, and then there's everybody else. So we have an issue with reward and wages in the world to come, in heaven, in the afterlife. And we also probably have limited interest in reward on earth. Why? It can give us some super shaky theological implications. Does that mean if God rewards people in this life, that billionaires are just super holy people who do everything right, and so God has rewarded them? Interesting. Or does it mean that people who are fighting from paycheck to paycheck just really aren't holy enough, and they need to repent and do some good works, and then God will reward them with more physical prosperity, right? That feels terrible to me. That feels super problematic. Feels prosperity gospel. Both feel bad.
Well, my high school self did a pretty substantial study on this one time. I don't know if it was this passage that kicked it off or something, but I went through and I found all the passages that talked about reward. Of course, I was only looking in English, so
sure,
who knows what I actually came up with behind the scenes. But I was like, there are so many passages that talk about this, and I came to the conclusion that there is some sort of variance in reward in heaven. So I guess I'm Wesleyan.
Okay.
Or Mormon, whatever. It didn't come to me in a way that was like, I'm concerned like, oh, this isn't fair. Like I was like, I don't know what the reward is or how
Right.
it will look, but like I trust that God will distribute that in a just way. But also I was like, but it's not the thing that we should be striving for. Like whatever you do or don't do, like you'll get the proper reward in a just way in heaven. And I never felt like it was supposed to be something that was supposed to play out on earth. But that was my concept of it. And I was like, there are so many passages that talk about this, way more than I realized.
Very prescient.
Yeah.
I love high school, Brent.
Yeah. Well, I was a nerd and also an idiot.
Weren't we all? I would love, by the way, some alternate time machine reality where we could take the Maymont teaching team and take each of us in high school and put each of high school us in like a ring and be like, who shall prevail in the cringe?
I'm sure we would be so obnoxious.
It would be great. I would be entertained. My ego would be destroyed along the way, but that's for better than for worse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the stuff that you are keying into there in high school, Brent is keying into, and the problem that we've been talking about here was a point of discussion up for debate in the Greco-Roman Mediterranean 2,000 years ago as well. So we have lots of company along the way in this puzzle, which is good news, at least to me. It feels like a tightrope trying to figure all of this stuff out. And maybe listeners at home, they don't feel this way at all. Maybe y'all have oceans more understanding than me or current Brent or high school Brent do. And that's awesome. But we're going to take a crack at walking this narrow path. And if at the end of this episode, you're like, I don't know, Elle, I'm not totally confident either. I'm just trying to do my best with the things I've learned. I want to be faithful to the word and faithful to Jesus, the living word, and not skipping over the concept because it feels tricky. And we won't have all the answers at the end of the day. But also, I want to try to develop a rigorous functional concept for what these verses in Scripture and the concept across Scripture is even talking about. So I want to try to stand a little further out on this bluff and point at the sunrise that I think I can see peeking over the horizon. And if I trip and plunge into heresy and oblivion, I'll count on Brent to point. Be like, seems sketchy. And that's okay with me too.
Well, and maybe there are so many passages about this because it was never quite settled. Like they could never quite communicate it in the way that was like, yeah, we said that, but now the way you're living that out, like that's not it. So let's try to say it a different way.
Sure.
So they kept coming back to this because it was just a common issue.
Threading the needle, getting that camel through the eye.
Yeah.
Amazing. So like you said, this concept of wages or reward, which is the Greek word misthos, it's taught by Jesus no fewer than 14 times in the Gospels. And that's a lot. It surprises me. It's more than like lust comes up, right? But in my circles, it's still understudied. And I think that's because we're trying to avoid harm, right? So double goal, not firing shots at anybody for not knowing what to do with this concept when it does feel like it's a minefield. But we're going to take a mini jaunt through our concordance to give us a feel for how this shows up in the rest of our New Testament. I'm going to save Jesus's 14 other teachings for when we run into them again in Matthew in the future. So this isn't comprehensive. It's just a taste of where misthos, wages or reward, shows up. So in Romans 4, we have, now to the one who works, his misthos is not reckoned as a gift, but as his due. 1 Corinthians 3, he who plants and he who waters are equal, and each shall receive his misthos according to his labor. If the work which any man has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a misthos. There's a little ... in the middle there, but it's still in 1 Cor 3. 1 Tim 5 quotes earlier scripture by saying, you shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain, and the laborer deserves his misthos. 2 John 1 says, look to yourselves that you may not lose what you have worked for, but may win a full misthos. And then finally in Revelation 22, behold, I am coming soon, bringing my misthos to repay everyone for what he has done. What stands out to you, Brent Billings?
So far, high school Brent feels vindicated.
Good.
Adding the Greek in does not seem to change anything yet.
3 cheers for high school Brent. We laud him with medals and honors.
What is the saying? Even a blind pig roots up something or other. I don't know.
Feel like a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Why not both? A blind pig with a clock. Okay. Well, here's what stands out to me. One of my big questions is, when does this wage or when does this reward come through, right? We're talking about the problematic nature of present tense reward with prosperity gospel and billionaires. And then some of it feels like future, right? And that we're worried about, are there tears in heaven, as in T-I-E-R-S? So if we look at this, Romans says to the one who works, his misthos is rendered not as a gift, but as his due. That's talking about Abraham, if you go and look at Romans 4. And Abraham...
context. I like it.
What? Yeah, it's talking about Abraham, and he definitely lived in the past, right? So maybe that's helpful. Maybe it's not. 1 Corinthians, at least the second part there, is talking about the refining fire. If the work which any man has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a misthos. Most of us, I would think, in context, would say that that's a future-orient judgment day type of situation. We go through the refining fire, and whether we have absolutely nothing, our eyebrows are burnt off, or we have the things that we've built life on, right? You can go read the rest of that scripture, and I believe Marty's taught on that before. So that seems future. 1 Timothy and another pretty much exact section in James seems to be present tense and not afterlife based, because it's talking about ministers. The laborer deserves his misthos. That's about how people doing kingdom work shouldn't be ill compensated just because they're like doing God's work, which is interesting and kind of counter to Christian culture, which is like, well, if you want to make money, you shouldn't have gone into ministry.
Yep.
Yep. 2 John, that's the do not lose what you worked for, but win a full misthos, is ambiguous, right? That could be future. If you can lose it somewhere along the way, but maybe it's present. I don't know. And then Revelation 22 definitely feels future, right? Because Jesus is returning. He's bringing his misthos. He's repaying everyone for what they've done. If we pivot over to Tanakh, the word is sachar, for wages or reward. And if we zoom in on the spots where God is the patron, Genesis 15, God's telling Abraham, do not be afraid. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great. Mm-hmm. Still ambiguous. Can't tell there if he's talking about Isaac or if he's talking bigger picture. You could make an argument that that's afterlife-based reward, and I wouldn't be super enlightened. Isaiah 40 and 62 say the same things about God as patron, giving sachar. So I'll read it. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his sachar is with him, and his compensation accompanies him. Still feels ambiguous. Is this about Jesus coming? At which time? In chapter 40, it goes on to talk about the coming good shepherd, which feels like Jesus coming for the first time. But in 62, it's talking about the liberation of Yerushalayim, maybe when they return from exile, or it could be the new earth. I don't know. It feels future, but present. So when is this wage or reward received? And if it's only received later, when the full revelation kingdom of God on earth has happened, is there anything that still happens on earth? We have more questions than answers here. What do you think, Brent?
Yes. High school Brent's conception is beginning to crumble a little bit because I thought it was entirely future at that time. But yeah, it's definitely murkier in general than I thought.
Perfect.
And also, I'm still just wondering, like, what does this word actually mean?
Excellent.
How are we translating it? Is this the best way? How else is it used in, I mean, you already said we're going to talk about Greco-Roman culture, so I'm hoping that brings a little bit of insight.
Yeah.
Because all these people are talking about this thing, but what was their understanding of how that word was used? So I look forward to the rest of this episode.
Great. I love muddying the waters. We've been successful. We've caused more problems than we had when we started. Perfect. Okay, well, this is called Talmudic Matthew, or Talmudic Conversations in Matthew. So let's crack open that rabbinic conversation. They, of course, are going to be rooted in Torah's teaching on Sachar. So let's see whether they give us an insight into these questions, especially around whether God's wages are present or future. So in Leviticus 19:13, can you read that for us in the JPS, Brent?
I love this verse so much. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning.
I love it too.
It is a passage that I send to my friend after we have shot a wedding together. If we are getting into our cars to drive away after the wedding and he has not sent me my money on Venmo yet, I send him Leviticus 19:13.
That's incredible. I love that so much. High school you and you are knocking it out of the park.
That's right. Yeah.
So for the rest of us who don't get to harass people we work with on Venmo, you might have noticed that this is not how our society works at all. That in biblical society, an employer not paying a laborer at the end of the day is stealing, and it's wrong. The laborer earned pay, and if you wait until the end of the month or the end of the 2 weeks to give them their pay, you're withholding it from them, and the employer is considered in debt to the laborer. If you've worked 28 days or whatever that month, where's the money? So there's no payday loans in biblical society, no trying to get from paycheck to paycheck. You work, you get the money. No trying to explain to your landlord when your paycheck's coming in, any of that. You work, you have it immediately.
We see this in the parable of the workers, where the guy goes out and hires people throughout the day, and then at the end of the day, everybody gets paid.
Poof, boom, done. Exactly. So in rabbinical comment, there's this emphasis that God is a good patron, a good employer, a good head of household. So God doesn't withhold his wages. For them, keeping all wages for some future afterlife feels like it would break Torah, even though for us it's normative in our culture. So Talmud Bava Metzia says, for what reason did this laborer ascend on a tall ramp or suspend himself from a tree and risk death to himself? Was it not for his wages? How then can an employer delay his payment?
So is this a modern Jewish practice in at least maybe Orthodox communities where they do a daily paycheck situation?
That is a great question. In my experience, when I was a private chef for an Orthodox couple, it would be after I sent like the grocery receipt, they would pay me immediately. So maybe, but I don't know. Probably differs community to community.
Yeah.
So that's present reward, right? God gives you a misthos or a sachar as a servant in his household on the day that you do the thing. There's this passage in Tractate Sota where they're talking about how Moshe's mom got paid to be the wet nurse for her own son when the daughter of Pharaoh adopts Moses. And it says this. This teaches that with regard to righteous people, not only is it so that God arranges that their lost items are returned to them, but he also arranges that they get their sechar, their wages, as the son of Yocheved was returned to her, and she also received payment for nursing him. So that's a present reward, right? God finds this mysterious, backward, upside down way to pay the servants of his house. And it's more life-giving and redemptive and beautiful than Moshe's mom, Yocheved, could have anticipated, right? That's one of the ways that the prosperity gospel gets tripped up. It's really focused on money and private jets, when obviously Moshe's mom preferred her son being returned to her 1,000,000 times more than she would have wanted financial compensation. She was faithful to risk her life and that of her family to fight for the life of her son. And God miraculously, through the back door, gave her son back to her in the present tense, not a future thing, upside down, miraculous, mysterious. So that's part of the problem, right? When we're trying to implement, okay, maybe I'm open to present tense reward, then we start trying to come up with an if then, right? If I do this, if I practice generosity, then God will, why? God will automatically give me more money. Maybe there's lots of kinds of wealth, though, and God is not hedged in by our limited imaginations of nuance, right?
My conception of this whole thing continues to crumble.
Great. Okay. So to get a bit further into this potentially uncomfortable territory, it's not just doing extraordinary things like sticking your son in a basket that has this expectation of a wage. There's research from Dr. Greg Gardner, who's the chair of Jewish law out of University of British Columbia. And he, thankfully, pulled together texts from Talmud. And he makes the argument very persuasively, in my opinion, that a wage is required in the various relationships described between humanity and the Lord. Master and servant, tenant and farmer, landowner, sharecropper. Those are all situations where you get a wage. And he makes the argument that reward isn't as good of a translation because sachar in Hebrew means to like hire somebody, right? Versus a reward is, oh, you found my dog on the street. Now I will think to myself of what I would like to bestow upon you, versus a wage is predetermined and contractual, even though we go, oh, contractual, but it's a relationship. But Gardner says that every mitzvah, every commandment earned sachar. No commandment exists, according to Talmud, without a sachar, without a wage. So the Makilta talks about Moshe going up and down over and over and over at Sinai. And they posit that Moshe did that because he knew he'd get another wage for every trip he took, which is great. A quote from Gardner on the Talmud, quote, teaching the Torah to one's child earns one sachar in the form of earthly social honor. God promises land as pay for keeping the commandments. In some cases, sachar is defined as God simply answering one's prayers.
Yeah. So if you're thinking of it as a reward, like I'm looking at the Abraham story, Moses story, it's like, oh, well, if it's a reward and I think that I didn't get whatever it is, it's like, well, I should have been, I mean, both of those cases are like parents willing to completely give away their child. Mm-hmm. Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Yaakov putting Moses in the basket, no expectation of like just completely willing to let go. So then if you're like, well, I didn't get the reward that I think it's going to be, I didn't sacrifice enough, I didn't do this. So then thinking of it as wages is like, and the idea that everything gets a wage, I think is helpful.
I'm glad. I think that it's still super tricky, right?
Yeah, definitely tricky, but just like less potentially toxic.
Okay.
Less of a chance of somebody like, oh, well, things didn't work out for you because you didn't go far enough. You didn't do enough. You didn't whatever.
Okay. I think I hear what you're saying. Yeah. I'm still leery of people in authority being like, look, there's this horrible thing I need you to do and sacrifice for your family. But yeah, I know that God will give you a promotion at your place or whatever.
Still a dangerous framework potentially, but I think less danger of like taking it to an extreme.
Hopefully.
Maybe.
Hopefully. Okay. So if that's the Jewish rabbinic literature around present tense reward or wages, rather, do they have anything for the future for like, well, in heaven, blah, blah, blah? Or is that ignored? Well, it is also looped into the Jewish conversation. Here's a story from Sifra, which seems to be saying that the Gentiles get the reward now while faithful Jewish folks get it in the afterlife. So here's the quote. To what can this be compared? It is similar to a king who sachar'd many laborers. And there was one laborer, and he worked for him for many days. The other laborers entered the king's presence to receive their sachar, and the aforementioned laborer entered with them. The king said to the first laborer, my son, I will look with favor upon you. These other laborers have done a small amount of work for me, and I will give them a small sachar. But a large sum I will calculate for you in the future. So too in this world, Yisrael asks for their sechar before God, and the nations of the world ask for their sechar before God. God says to Yisrael, my children, I will look with favor upon you. The nations of this world have done a small amount of work for me, and I will give them a small sechar, but a large sum I will reckon for you in the future.
That feels backwards from what I normally think about with Jewish understanding and not really thinking about the afterlife. And what does that date to? What kind of time frame is that?
Sifra?
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up. To me, it does feel in line with there being a different rule for Gentiles and Jewish people, right?
Sure.
And then the idea of the world to come comes up all the time, right? We've had that earlier in the season. Like, if you talk to a woman, even if you're really good at studying Torah, you have no part in the world to come, right? It's an expectation that's always on the horizon, and it's something that you can lose hold of or not. And then the separation between what happens for Jewish people and what happens for the quote unquote righteous Gentile. And if we compare this to Jesus's teaching that we're basing this episode on in Matthew 6, he bases sechar or misthos off of what? If we look at the text, take heed that you do not do your alms. Wow, I can't read it either. Take heed that
King James strikes back.
Ye do not your alms before men. Still can't read it. To be seen of them. Otherwise, you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou dost thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily, I say unto you, they have the reward. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret himself shall reward thee openly. So the point of Jesus's teaching is not about, is it Jew or Gentile? Is it how long you've been working or how great your contribution to kingdom has been? That doesn't come into play at all. In fact, Jesus's parables on laborers showing up at different times during the shift and getting the same wage directly goes against that. What he is concerned about is our heart motivation. Are we doing our service, our labor for the glory of men, for the praise of men, to look good, to get the trumpet blown, like an actor, which throwback to old school Bema material? Or are we doing it for God, right? And everybody gets paid the same, doesn't matter who they are. Heart motivation feels pretty Jesus-y to me.
Yeah, it's not even about what the thing is. It's like, you're going to get whatever you deserve. Like, that's done. But it has nothing to do with what the action is.
Right. It's all parable. It's all story. There's no like, your insula in heaven, you'll get 8 extra rooms versus someone next to you will only get the Harry Potter closet, right? Is not defined, which is almost designed to drive Westerners insane, right? Like, well, but what does it mean? Nobody seems to be interested, as far as I can tell, in describing what that means and what it looks like and what we can expect. It's just like, God's going to do what God's going to do. Back to high school Brent, like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Reward is what the reward is. Dr. Gardner spends a good amount of time pointing out how culturally embedded it is that anything that's perceived as self-oriented is inherently unrighteous. So Dr. Gardner pulls on lots of early Jewish literature, but also verses like Deuteronomy 24:13 to point out that receiving personal credit is an inherent part of doing the right thing, and we can't pretend otherwise. To that verse, it's talking about when someone's has loaned their cloak away and making sure that you get the cloak back to them when there's been an exchange. The verse goes like this: so that he may sleep in his cloak and may bless you, and it shall be considered righteousness on your behalf before Yahweh your God. So systematic theology aside, right, we would not expect to see any righteousness on our behalf credited to us in any way, right? like that's throwing a giant stick into our cog of what we expect the Bible to say about righteousness. But Gardner says self-interest need not be sinister. Modern moral aversions to self-oriented behavior are strongly tied to attitudes toward wealth, which should be seen as culturally specific. Because as soon as we're talking about reward and, okay, like, God, I don't get to know what the reward is. Maybe that's fine. Maybe I don't feel fine about that. But it shouldn't be that we're thinking about our reward at any point. We should just be doing the right thing and stop worrying about it. Stop thinking about that. Just be grateful for what you have. We, or at least I anyway, speaking for myself, have all of these like immediate visceral responses to even talking about reward. And so it just might help us understand and generate some curiosity about like, oh, where is this aversion coming from? How did Christian culture get to be the way that it is? Why were we trained in that? Like, well, if you are in ministry, you won't have any money and you should suffer. How did we get there? We're going to check out another angle that I think is very influential, and that's the Greco-Roman angle.
This will be my salvation, I hope.
Wow, no pressure, Elle.
Bring it all together.
Okay.
Help me understand.
What's happening? Let's see if we get anywhere. In the Roman context, Cicero, 1st century BCE, says that we should only engage in our good deeds and our public service for duty, for virtue, for honor. These are big values in Roman society. It's a whole thing. I've put Wikipedia links and resources to go in the show notes just on these Roman values that define what it meant to be in a Roman, in the same way caring about like freedom is American, right? You cannot overestimate how important duty and virtue are in Rome. So when we say only do good works because we're supposed to, that's speaking the language of duty. We are obligated to do something. When we say only do good works, because it's good for you and it sanctifies you, which I'm not going to argue with that. I do think doing good work sanctifies you and it's good to do. But that is virtue. That's a Roman concept that we're bringing in. And potentially, I don't know, you can try to find Bible verses that support this particular thing, that those are the only reasons you should be doing any mitzvot. But potentially that's pulling from this Roman context in which at least modern American culture is still enmeshed. Cicero says all things should be done for the good, but never for disgraceful profit. He argues that because of this high calling of duty and virtue and honor, for instance, senators shouldn't get wages. They shouldn't get a stipend for serving in the Senate, even if they want one. It is worth noting, though, that Cicero is coming from a high level in the Roman social hierarchy.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a lot of needs compared to the common person in Rome. He's an equestrian, which means he has between 50 to 100 slaves.
That's some wealth, I guess, at the time.
Yes. So there's a difference between someone who doesn't have enough and who's trying to get by, choosing to say, what? You shouldn't get anything. It should just be for your honor. And someone who has more than enough and is oppressing people, saying, well, no, it's only for duty and virtue that you should do good things. So if our heartstrings sing at the idea of doing things for duty and virtue alone, is that biblical? Is that Roman? Just asking a question. We're going to hang out with the Greeks for a minute before reflecting.
I would be curious to know what other cultures do as far as their government. But whenever I've seen the wages of like the highest elected people in our country,
yeah,
it seems really low to me, especially considering they have to do a lot of traveling to DC and then they got to come back and talk to their people. And like, there's just and I don't know how much of that stuff is compensated in other ways. Maybe they have some travel stipends and stuff, but it seems like we've held on to that value system of
somewhat
not giving people that much money for that kind of service.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm okay with raising that wage if they aren't allowed to go like be lobbyists after government.
I mean, yeah,
awards.
there's all sorts of complicated ways you can look at that. And it's like, I don't think any of them are really hurting that much, but
yeah, not to mention.
Yeah, just the raw
and
wages. It's interesting how that is structured.
Sure. Okay. In our Greek world, we have Aristotle, Plato's pupil. He's one of our primary Western sources for finding wages and money broadly distasteful. Why is that? He had a resurgence after the Crusades during the Middle Ages when his writing, Greco-Roman era, really, really early, but it was trafficked across Europe post-Crusades, and it ended up massively influencing the overall zeitgeist and church doctrine. So he believed that the pursuit of wages in exchange for good deeds was unnatural and would lead to moral decay. Which sounds familiar to me. Maybe your church context has been different than mine. But when we, again, peek at his personal context, Aristotle had his own estate. He had royal patronage from Alexander the Great. He had a research institute, which included a whole library and plenty of slaves. He said about slavery that for some that should rule and others be ruled is a thing that not only is necessary, but expedient. From the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjection and others for rule.
A real Calvinist.
Yeah. A slave is a living tool, just as a tool is an inanimate slave.
Oh, dear.
Fun guy to hang out with. So on the one hand, maybe it's not crazy to not want to give wages to someone who already has more than enough. But it is suspicious to me that some of our ideas about reward from God maybe came from these pagan Greco-Romans who were talking about wages in a context where they had immense wealth and slaves and they were landowners. People who received wages at that time weren't really landowners, right? They're artisans. And there's been an interesting historic economic distaste for artisans as compared to landowners. But if you want to read more about that, which is way too complicated for this episode, read the book that we're putting in the show notes from Dr. Gardner.
Wealth, Poverty, and Charity in Jewish Antiquity.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's a great book. It's very academic, so know what you're getting into going into it. In their context, doing these good deeds, dispensing charity and generosity to those in need was embedded in the system of Eurgetism, possibly Eurgetism. I'm guessing it's Gatism. We're all just doing our best.
Okay.
And if you want to read more about that, there's also a link in the show notes. But the general idea is if you give money to the building of an aqueduct or to games at the Coliseum, you'd get a big plaque and or a statue that says, thanks to the generosity of this very important benefactor. Or you'd get the best seats in the fanciest box by the emperor at the games, and everyone have to clap for you when the emperor announces you. So Aristotle and Cicero are partially complaining about this practice. And when we loop Jesus back into the conversation, it does feel kind of like Jesus is dissing it, right? Don't worry about getting a statue. Don't do things for the applause of humans. Worry about getting that wage or reward from the Lord.
And yet a practice that seemed to be carried on by the early church, like the synagogue in Sardis that we have visited together, actually.
Yes.
Has inscriptions that says, so-and-so has contributed such and such to this synagogue. I went to the Museum of the Bible last year, and they had this big mosaic display from some church, and it was like funded by a Roman centurion or something. And there was a big portion of the mosaic that was describing how he was the one who made this thing happen. So
right. And it's also modern practice. If you go to any university campus or whatever, it's like, welcome to the Brent Billings Center for Learning.
Oh, dear.
Normative. Yeah. So I don't know if the early church still did a better job at not making a huge deal about their donors, or maybe they didn't take the statue of the centurion on a little parade where everyone partied and yay. Maybe just putting it on a plaque was restraint for them. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just like so much part of a culture that they couldn't fathom not doing that.
Right.
But Jesus is still calling and inviting us into this idea that we do get a plaque of some kind, right? Not literally, but it's from God. And so don't worry about how it's received here. And all of that is still enmeshed in this more Eastern context where the ties between different parties are good. And you're always giving gifts to one another. And you're always celebrating one another in ways that, again, outside of these ceremonies that we have in the Western context of like ribbon cuttings where you specifically thank your donors by name and everything, we don't like that. We adjure public thanks most of the time as distasteful, and that just doesn't carry over into the context that the Bible is written in. But there's going to be some of us who still hate this idea and still want to say we should be doing the right thing because Jesus told us to. And I hear you.
That's me.
Yeah. Roman virtue and piety aside, that's fine. You can try to make an argument from like Tanakh whenever God gives like a whole bunch of mitzvot and he says, why? He says, because I am Adonai, right?
Yeah.
And there's other reasons, right? He talks about caring for the poor, and what happens if you don't care for the poor is something that you should fear. And yet we can still feel that way and also start to invite in this concept that Jesus teaches on no fewer than 14 times, that there is some kind of wage, that there is some kind of reward, and maybe some of it is present and maybe some of it is future, even if we cannot define how to answer all the questions about present suffering or prosperity gospel or the VIP room in heaven. But wherever we are, I'm curious if we are still experiencing a like full body revulsion to the idea that God's goodness could include wages for his servants. I want to stay curious about that because I think it could be instructive. Where we've talked about maybe where this cultural impulse could be coming from. But setting that conversation aside, if you're just annoyed by all of that, that's fine. I invite us to think about if we are like, shove it in the trash, shove it out the door. What does God's goodness even mean for us? If we're singing about the goodness of God or that God's a good father, what do we mean? Do we just mean that God is good for not throwing us all into hell where we belong? Is that the limit of it? I'm not saying that we deserve wages from our employer. I hope we don't come away from this episode being like, wow, God, I guess Elle really thinks she should be getting her private jet or whatever because she's serving God. That's not what I'm saying. We all fail all the time, and we all sin, and we all forget where we're going continually. And so when talking about like, are we good employees to our employer? Not particularly ever, right? But I am saying that God, in his infinite mercy and compassion and nurturing goodness, might still choose to hold God's self to God's own integrity, even when we are not the servants that we ought to be. And just maybe we're importing an unbiblical, more pagan perspective on who God is if we're imagining God distantly snorting at us down here on our earthly abode while he floats somewhere out in the stratosphere, rolling his eyes at us, being worried about our circumstances because he knows how irrelevant they are in the light of the glory of eternity. But rather that just maybe, as our chief co-laborer, God's down here in the muck, in the trenches of this earth alongside us, and in his goodness, doling out wages as he sees fit. And maybe sometimes when we do get those wages, because our theology has been Greco-Roman influenced and we're not sure about all this stuff, we receive wages from God and we're embarrassed and we shove them behind our backs and we don't even enjoy these gifts from God because of the way we've been imagining God.
It's convicting. And I think there's no simple answer to it. Like these cultures and the biblical authors, like everybody's been wrestling with this tension for the whole time. Like this is, I think if it was supposed to be clear, if it was supposed to be easier, I mean, it felt so clear to high school Brent.
Well, when Jesus brings it up, he seems to have the expectation that everyone knows what he's talking about, right?
Yeah.
He's just like, you have a wage coming and you're invited to look for it. Isaiah invites us to look for it. Revelation invites us to look for it. And we should just look for it as coming from God and not from our beautiful statue or the claps of the crowd.
Yeah. And perhaps part of the problem is some of these wages or rewards, however you want to look at them, come from other places. Right. And if we attribute everything to God, then some of the stuff that we see feels really weird. Because It's like, why would God do that for that person and not for this person?
Right. There's so much, again, minefield potential for offense, because some people way back then, the whole dynasty of Pharaoh is corrupt and evil, and they're the ones oppressing us. And you want to tell me that God used Pharaoh's daughter to give a wage to Yocheved, to Moshe's mom? Like, she is evil. She's corrupt. She's off the deep end. She's bad. God can't use that in order to pay a wage to Yocheved. And yet God doesn't seem to always be worked up about our problems, our sticky points.
Right.
But he is invested, seemingly, in telling us that we can expect his goodness at some point, whether we're Jew or Gentile, whether we've been serving a long time or a short time.
Something that requires a lot of humility and seeking God and holding things loosely, I guess.
Absolutely. I love all those things. Okay.
Well, that's our episode, Elle. Thank you for bringing it to the table, if not necessarily clearing it up once and for all. We couldn't quite accomplish
get there.
What all of our ancestors have not accomplished either. So,
well, maybe they have, and I just missed it. It's totally possible. If you think I'm totally wrong and I've missed it, have mercy upon me, a sinner. Throw a rope down for me to climb back up the cliff. I don't mind being wrong, but this is what I found. And enjoy those resources and works cited. You can read all of Cicero and all of Aristotle if you'd like. That resource from Greg Gardner. If you're curious about these giant defining Roman pillars of society, have I got the Wikipedia articles for you? And then finally, more on Eurgatism or possibly Getism. No one knows. It's just me. I just don't know.
Oh, in the grand tradition of mispronouncing things on the Bema podcast, you're in good company. So it's all good.
Fantastic. Join the cloud of witnesses of incompetence.
We're doing our best. We're doing our best. But thank you for sharing all those resources. Thank you for walking us through those passages. And my instinct growing up was I wanted everything to be black and white. I wanted everything to be simple. So I would read that into all of the things that I found, and it's just not that simple. So we have to wrestle with this. We have to do this in community. We can't come to these conclusions on our own. So this is hopefully just the start of the conversation for you. Hopefully you're in a discussion group. If you have any questions, you can use the contact page at bamodiscipleship.com to get in touch. We put a lot of those questions into a document for Q&As. We do these live Q&As every once in a while. And maybe some of these questions will get set aside for Elle, and we can revisit these in 6 months or a year or whatever. And like this is an ongoing conversation. So thank you for joining us on the Bama podcast today. We will talk to you again soon.